Imagine the world around you plunging into darkness. A sudden, suffocating silence. The hum of electricity disappearing in an instant. You light a candle, trying to shake the unease creeping over you. Then, in the flickering glow, you see movement in the corner of the room. Something or someone is there, just beyond the reach of the light. You're not alone in the dark. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into 3 disturbing true blackout horror stories that will make you think twice the next time the power goes out. From unexplainable shadows to chilling encounters, these tales will leave you sleeping with the lights on, if you're lucky enough to have them. Let's jump into the darkness together. Story 1, The Visitor in the Dark by Jaxon Holt. My name is Jaxon Holt. I had just moved into a townhouse in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I thought it would be the perfect place for a fresh start, peaceful, isolated, and far enough from the noise of the city. But I quickly learned that sometimes isolation isn't as peaceful as it seems. It was a Tuesday evening, just after sunset, when the blackout hit. The power went out without warning, leaving me in complete darkness. I sat still for a moment, listening to the hum of silence that filled the space. No lights, no TV, no electronics, just the sound of my breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. At first I wasn't concerned. Power outages were common, especially in older neighborhoods. I grabbed my phone to check the time, but it was dead. Of course, I'd forgotten to charge it. I stood up and walked over to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer outside. The streetlights had gone out too, leaving the entire block cloaked in darkness. It was the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the world outside had vanished. But my thoughts were interrupted by a soft thud. I froze. It wasn't the sound of wind or the house settling. This sound was deliberate, someone knocking on my door. I walked cautiously to the front door, my mind racing. Who would be out here in the dark, I thought. I hadn't expected any visitors, especially not this late. Maybe it was a neighbor who had lost power too and needed to borrow something. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly. The knocking came again, slow, methodical, like whoever it was waiting for me to answer. I paused before opening the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. No one stood on the other side. The porch light was off, but I could see nothing but darkness in the small circle of light it cast. Confused, I opened the door slightly, calling out into the night. Hello? There was no response, just a heavy silence. I stepped out onto the porch, looking down the empty street in both directions. The only sound I could hear was the wind rustling through the trees. Is someone there? I asked again, my voice now echoing in the stillness. I waited, but there was no reply. Feeling uneasy, I closed the door and locked it behind me, making sure the deadbolt was securely in place. But before I could turn around, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. Soft, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. The footsteps came from somewhere just beyond the porch, moving across the lawn, heading toward the side of the house. My heart pounded in my chest. Who was outside my house in the middle of a blackout, and why was no one else around to see them? I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way to the back door. I shined the beam of light across the backyard, scanning the darkness. The backyard was empty, save for the few trees swaying in the breeze. No figures, no movement. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, as if someone or something was watching me from just beyond the light. Suddenly I heard it again, the faintest scrape of shoes on the gravel driveway, followed by another deliberate knock on my front door. My stomach twisted in knots. It was impossible. I had just come from there, and the porch had been empty. I ran back to the front door, feeling the cold sweat on the back of my neck. As I reached for the handle, the doorbell rang. The sound of it, sharp, persistent, cut through the thick silence. I didn't want to open the door again, but curiosity, and something far deeper, pushed me forward. I grabbed the knob and twisted it, but this time, the door didn't budge. The lock wouldn't turn. Panic set in. The lock had never stuck like this before. I tried again, shaking the knob frantically, but it wouldn't move. Then I heard the sound of the door creaking, like someone was pressing their weight against it from the outside. My blood ran cold as I backed away, stumbling back into the living room. The knocking came again, this time even louder, as if whoever was on the other side was getting desperate. But I knew something was wrong. No one would have been knocking this persistently in a blackout. Not this way, not in this kind of silence. I stumbled backward into the hallway, feeling my way along the walls, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The air seemed to thicken with tension. My mind raced for an explanation. Maybe it was someone playing a prank or a neighbor trying to get my attention, but none of it made sense. Why would they be knocking so urgently? I finally managed to grab my phone from the charging station. The screen flashed to life. I could see that there was no signal. I had no way of calling anyone for help. My eyes darted back toward the front door, now shrouded in complete blackness. I stepped closer, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was out there through the window. But all I saw was my own reflection staring back at me. Then, as if on cue, the knocking stopped. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, waiting, listening to the silence. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, the only sound in the house. I held my breath, half expecting the door to burst open at any moment. Finally, after what seemed like an age, I reached for the door handle again. With a deep breath, I turned it. This time, it gave. I hesitated before pulling the door open, but there was no one there. Just the cold night air, just the empty porch. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the yard and the dark street. There were no signs of movement, no footprints in the wet grass, no figure lurking in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched, that something or someone had been standing right there, just out of sight. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally returned inside and locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the night was far from over. The blackout lasted for hours, but I never felt truly alone again. To this day, I have no idea who or what was knocking at my door that night. But sometimes when the lights go out, I still hear that faint, deliberate knock, and I can't help but wonder if the visitor will return. Story 2, The Silent Watcher by Marissa Evans. My name is Marissa Evans. I live in a small, quiet town nestled in the outskirts of a bustling city. Growing up, I always found comfort in the peaceful nature of my neighborhood, where life seemed to move at a slower pace. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the most exciting thing that ever happened was a stray cat getting stuck in a tree. But that peacefulness changed one summer evening when the power went out. It was one of those rare yet annoying occurrences that you know are coming, but can't prepare for. It was just after dinner when the lights flickered and then died, plunging my entire house into darkness. I thought it would be a short outage, maybe a few minutes at most. But when the minutes turned into hours, I started to feel uneasy. I wasn't alone, though. My dog Baxter was lying beside me on the couch. His ears perked up as though he could sense something was wrong. The silence in the house was deafening. The only sound was the occasional rustle of Baxter moving around. I grabbed a flashlight and began to search for candles. As I rummaged through the kitchen drawers, a sudden chill swept through the room, making me shiver. I paused, thinking it was just my imagination, but it was impossible to ignore how cold it had suddenly become. I quickly lit a few candles, their flickering flames providing the only light in the room. I sat back down on the couch, holding Baxter close, trying to reassure myself that this was just a typical power failure. But the unease wouldn't go away. Then I heard it. A soft, barely audible tap against the window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was so quiet, almost as if it were part of my imagination. I got up slowly and walked over to the window, trying to keep my breathing steady. Outside, the street was dark. There were no cars, no lights, just the endless black of the night. I stared into the darkness for a moment, then turned away. Maybe it was just a branch swaying in the wind, or a neighbor walking past. But then the tap came again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to see what was causing the noise. But all I could make out was the faint outline of the trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. There was nothing there. My pulse quickened, and I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was out there watching me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just overreacting. The power was out. It was a stormy night, and the wind was probably making noises outside. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the feeling of being watched lingered. I grabbed my phone to check the time, but of course it was dead. Another reminder that the blackout was affecting everything. I sat back down, trying to distract myself, but Baxter was acting strange. He was staring intently at the door, his ears flattened, his body rigid. The hair on his back stood up, and he growled softly under his breath. This was unlike anything I had seen before. Baxter was a friendly dog, always wagging his tail and ready to greet anyone who walked through the door. But tonight, he was on edge. I cautiously moved to the front door, peering through the peephole. I saw nothing, just the same emptiness as before. No one was out there. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind. The mind can play funny games when you're sitting in the dark, alone. But before I could turn away, I heard it again. A soft scraping sound, slow and deliberate, coming from the side of the house. My heart skipped a beat. I stood frozen for a moment, my hand gripping the doorknob. My mind raced. Could it be someone trying to break in? But no, I would have heard them approach. The yard was quiet and there was no one standing at the window anymore. I cautiously moved to the window and peeked out, holding my breath. The front yard was empty. The street was still deserted. But as my eyes scanned the darkness, they landed on something that made my blood run cold. A figure, tall, motionless, was standing just beyond the streetlight at the end of the driveway. The light barely illuminated the person's outline, but what struck me was how they stood completely still, like they were waiting for something, or someone. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel them staring at me. My heart raced as I backed away from the window, a cold sweat forming on my forehead. Was I just imagining it? Was I being paranoid? I tried to shake it off, but it was impossible. The figure was still there, standing motionless in the shadows. And then, just as suddenly as I had noticed them, they were gone. I waited breathless, hoping they would reappear, but the darkness remained still. No movement, no sound, nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped away from the window, trying to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light or some random stranger passing by. Maybe I was just overreacting to the isolation of the blackout. But when I looked down at Baxter, I saw that he was still staring intently at the door, his growl low and persistent. My dog never acted like this, especially not for no reason. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, light but deliberate, coming from the direction of the front door. But no one was there. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt trapped, as if the darkness outside had somehow seeped into my home. I never saw the figure again that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been watching me. And no matter how hard I tried to forget, the memory of that silent watcher standing in the dark haunted me for a long time afterward. To this day, I don't go near that window after dark, and I never quite feel alone when the lights go out. Story 3, The Dark Cabin by Caleb Wallace. My name is Caleb Wallace, and I thought I'd made a great decision when I booked a weekend getaway in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. I'd been working nonstop for months, and the idea of escaping the noise of everyday life to unwind in nature seemed like the perfect remedy. Little did I know, the peace and tranquility of the forest would soon give way to a nightmare that would haunt me long after I left. It was late Friday afternoon when my friends and I arrived at the cabin. It was old, built with weathered wood, surrounded by thick trees that seemed to stretch on forever. The kind of place you'd expect to find in a remote part of a horror movie. But I wasn't thinking about horror. I was thinking about getting some rest, away from the hustle of city life. We unpacked, made a fire in the fireplace, and settled in for the night. The first few hours went by uneventfully. We played cards, told jokes, and drank beer as the night grew darker. By around 10 p.m., the power went out. At first, we all laughed it off, assuming it was just a blown fuse or a power surge. We weren't exactly close to civilization, and the cabin wasn't modern by any means, but it didn't bother us. We had candles, flashlights, and a whole lot of booze. We lit the candles and settled back in, trying to make the most of the situation. The glow of the candles cast long shadows on the walls, but the darkness didn't feel threatening yet. I remember feeling a strange shift in the air as the night went on. The temperature had dropped sharply, and an almost oppressive stillness filled the cabin. At first I thought it was just the chill of the evening, but there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. It felt as if the entire cabin had become colder than it should have been, like the warmth we had gathered around the fire was being slowly drained out by something unseen. We went to bed around midnight. I shared a room with one of my friends, Alex. The bed was uncomfortable, the sheets too cold, but I was exhausted. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the strange feeling in the pit of my stomach, but sleep wouldn't come. As I lay there in the dark, I heard it, a soft scratching sound, like fingernails scraping gently across the wooden floor. I froze, holding my breath. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. It seemed to be coming from the hallway just outside the room, like someone or something was walking around, but we were all accounted for. Everyone was in bed. I glanced over at Alex, but he was asleep, snoring softly. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a branch scraping against the window. But as the minutes ticked by, the scratching grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was out there was trying to get in. My heart began to race, my palms slick with sweat. I decided to get up and check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and crept into the hallway. The beam of light cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The scratching had stopped, but a strange, cold draft seemed to sweep through the cabin, carrying with it a sense of dread. I walked to the door at the end of the hallway, but there was nothing there, just an empty room. No one else was around. I returned to the bedroom, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. I crawled back into bed, pulled the covers up to my chin and tried to sleep. But the sense of unease wouldn't leave me. I kept hearing those scratching sounds, now followed by the soft creak of floorboards, as if something was moving through the cabin. By the time dawn broke, I hadn't slept a wink. I felt drained, like the night had sucked all the energy from me. I got up, trying to shake off the unease. I wasn't the only one who felt it. The others looked as exhausted as I did, their faces pale and drawn. We made coffee, tried to start the day, but the strange atmosphere in the cabin was inescapable. That afternoon, we decided to take a walk around the property to clear our heads. We hiked down a small trail that led into the woods, the thick trees pressing in on either side. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that prickled the back of my neck. But as we ventured deeper into the forest, it grew stronger. Alex and I lagged behind the others, talking quietly. That's when we saw it, a shadow. It wasn't a person, at least not in the way we understood. It was tall, far too tall for a human figure, and it moved with a strange fluidity, almost as if it was gliding through the trees. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things, but Alex saw it too. His face went pale, his eyes wide. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I nodded, unable to find words. The shadow moved deeper into the woods, and we stood there, paralyzed with fear. We wanted to run, but we couldn't tear our eyes away. The figure lingered for a moment longer before it disappeared into the trees. We quickly turned and hurried back to the cabin, but the feeling of being followed never left us. That night, the cabin seemed colder than ever. The strange sounds returned, this time louder and more distinct. The scraping, the tapping, the slow, deliberate footsteps moving just outside the door. We locked ourselves in, but it didn't feel like enough. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud bang, like something heavy had been thrown against the door. I jumped out of bed, heart racing. I could hear heavy breathing, but when I shined my flashlight toward the door, no one was there. The rest of the night passed in a tense silence. None of us slept. We stayed awake, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the air. It felt like the very walls of the cabin were alive, breathing with something ancient and malevolent. The next morning we left. We packed up quickly, not bothering to check out the proper way. As we drove away, I glanced back at the cabin, now distant in the rearview mirror. It stood there, silent, waiting. And as the woods slowly disappeared behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that cabin was still watching, still waiting. To this day, I haven't returned to those woods. I don't know what was in that cabin or what we experienced that weekend, but I can't escape the feeling that it wasn't just the cabin that was haunted. It was the forest itself. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these true stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.